Let's move on. Let's get to the tips, the breakdown for the massive prelim finals coming up. Swans v Port Adelaide, Friday night. Geelong v Brisbane, Saturday evening. All right, we'll start with Swans versus Port Adelaide. Now, we're going to do it how we did it similar to the last couple of weeks. We're going to be talking about some questions, some matchups, and then we're going to get into the tip. So, Sydney v Port Adelaide will start off first. I think there's a couple of big questions going into this game. The first one, I think the big one is, can the Swans break an 8-year drought against Port Adelaide? If you don't know, the Swans, the last time they beat the Power was 8 years ago, 2016. The last time the Swans, well, not the last time the Swans made a grand final, but the last time was, 2016. Aliria still played at the Swans. Isaac Heaney was, I think, in his second year or his first year. A lot of huge changes since then. But the Swans have played Port Adelaide once a year since then, haven't beaten them. They've only played Port Adelaide at the SCG once since then. That was the Ollie Florent missed goal that everyone celebrated, including myself, who thought that was going through. It didn't go through. Another talking point as well is Port Adelaide. Can they bring that immense pressure that they brought against the Hawks again? Because obviously against the Cats, they were woeful. They stood up for Ken. They did it against Hawthorn. Can they bring that back? Interesting call. Also, I think this is a pretty big one. Can the Swans get their tall forwards involved? Because I think the first final that they played against the Giants, they were pretty unseen. And of course, I mean, everyone sees the Amati goal, but if you didn't watch the game, Amati was unsighted for 3 quarters. Well, 4 quarters, really. He only had that one moment. But with that goal, he won the game for them. So the likes of Logan McDonald, who's had a pretty poor couple of weeks. Hayden McLean, he's been good when he's played in the ruck at times, but he's also got to start getting in between the arcs and taking contested marks, and that's something that he hasn't been doing at times. So he needs to get more involved in that. The two big talking points on the selection front. On the Sydney side, who comes in for Callum Mills? At the moment, it's likely between Fox and Adams. I think that's a pretty safe bet to say. My head and my heart as a Swans fan, I'm sorry to Taylor Adams, but Robbie Fox, I think, has to come in here. I think personally, Fox, he's the one call here. I think he could start as sub, which releases Campbell into the main 22. We obviously saw Braden Campbell had a great qualifying final when he came on as the sub. He was playing with a bit of an injury as well, so I think that he'll be fine with the week off, coming back into the team. And I think that he plays a good role. Robbie Fox offers the sub, but also is a lot more versatile. Fox could play up forward. He could play down back. He could almost play as a tagging role. I wouldn't mind him actually playing on Jason Horne-Francis at times if he came on and had to make that sort of play. So I think Fox has a lot more versatility. The only way I see Taylor Adams coming into the team is if the likes of maybe a Justin McInerney takes the subs vest, because I can't see Taylor Adams doing that. I don't think that's a good call at all. The one thing that Taylor Adams does have on his side is the fact that he has had some pretty good performances in finals before. He's a very older body, so I think I can help him as well in a team that Sydney, their midfielders, other than maybe James Rowbottom, they're not really tough midfielders, and in big finals, that's obviously a real weapon to have. We obviously saw a couple of years ago with the Cats up against Sydney in that grand final. The main reason why the Cats dominated early and then eventually dominated the whole game was the bigger body midfielders of the Cats, like Selwood, Dangerfield, Guthrie. They just outmuscled all the Sydney midfielders. So that is the one reason why Taylor Adams would come in. I think for the prelim, though, for the versatility, I would personally pick Robbie Fox. Now, the only other one I could see potentially coming in is Caden Cleary, but I feel like after that first final, I don't think he's going to come in now, which is a little bit unfortunate for the young guy, but I'm sure he'll get more opportunities going forward. Now, on the selection side for Port Adelaide, I think there's only one here. I think it is, with Todd Marshall going out, does Dixon come straight back in? Because Dixon was obviously a laid out in the semi-final against Hawthorn. He had a very poor qualifying final, but so did most Port Adelaide players, let's be honest. So Marshall did come in, went out with concussion. Dixon, does he come back in? He doesn't have a lot of form behind him. The reason why I actually think Dixon should be a straight swap for him, and I don't know what my brother thinks about this, but I think he should come straight back in because Sydney's tall defenders are quite short. McCartan obviously is the tallest, but Melican and Rampy, if the other two options here, I think Port Adelaide should try and stretch them. Sydney have had troubles in the past against big, muscly forwards. Think of Tom Hawkins. Jesse Hogan even last week had some good moments. He just kind of tapered off in the second half. But I think that Dixon comes in, and I think he has a real big impact here. So I'm actually saying that Port Adelaide should bring Dixon in and then straight for Marshall. Now, the only other option is probably a small forward, maybe a McEntee. But I just feel like Port Adelaide should really try and stretch the Swans, in my opinion. Now, looking at a couple of matchups through this game, Jordan is obviously the tagger for the Swans. I think he probably goes to Zach Butters. I think that's the best call here. I don't even know who he went to when Sydney last played them. Obviously, if you don't know, the Swans got smashed by 112 points against Port Adelaide. That game, it's kind of a blur at this point. I don't really remember most about it, or even where James Jordan even played in that game. I know he played, but I don't even know who he tagged. I think he goes to Zach Butters here and tries to take him down. In my opinion, looking at Jason Horne-Francis, one of the more important players for Port, I think James Rowbottom takes him at the stoppage, and then I think when he goes up forward, Rampy will take him. I think that's the best call. Looking at on Port Adelaide's side, I think Willem Drew likely goes to Isaac Heaney. Heaney, if that is the case, there is some times this year where Isaac Heaney has been tagged at stoppage and has been shut out of games. And I think what the Swans learned from those sort of stuff throughout the year is to chuck Heaney forward. And I think that's what really worked against the Giants. He was kind of not struggling, but he didn't have a very good first 2 quarters against GWS. Tom Green at the stoppage kind of had him. And what he did was he started to get forward. And Isaac Heaney is such a hard matchup to go on. And I really don't think Port Adelaide have the matchup for Isaac Heaney if he goes forward. You would think Aaliyah, Zerk Thatcher. I just think that Heaney's too crafty for them. Especially if the ball hits the ground. So I really don't see a option for it. Probably a Miles Bergman would be my best bet. But even then, if the Swans have McLean, Amati, and then also McDonald, those 3 are already going to be taken. So that means at that point that maybe a Logan Evans would have to stand next to him. And I don't think Logan Evans could take a Heaney. I don't think that's really going to work. So that's where I would see it on that sort of front. If Heaney does get held up by Drew, he has to get forward. Now, Georgiades, I think he's the most damaging Port Adelaide tall forward for the whole year. I think Melican gets this job. I think that Melican can meet him in the one-on-ones. I think he'll have him. I think he's a little bit quicker than McCartan, so I think that's where that's going to be better held there. That's where I'm kind of looking for it. And I actually think the ruck battle here is brilliant too. Jordan Sweet, what a game he had against Hawthorn last week against Lloyd Meek. Now, Meek played really well as well, but Jordan Sweet, what a couple of months he's had. He was basically, at the start of the year, he was with Ivan Soldo trying to get for that battle. And now he's jumped over Ivan Soldo. And then Vizentini's done that too. And Jordan Sweet has been a revelation for Port Adelaide the last couple of weeks, especially when they've hit their form. So I think this is a massive matchup. He's got to go up against the big Brodie Grundy, who's had a week off as well. This is going to be a great matchup. But what I think the most important matchup is, probably something that a lot of people wouldn't have thought about, is I think Rioli's matchup. He had a massive game against Hawthorn last week, was close to getting votes in this game for me, for the Boundary Riders finals votes. I think Cunningham will take this job. He's done really well on small forwards this year. I think he's been very underrated, Harry Cunningham. Obviously took Brett Daniels in that first final, kept him silent. And Cunningham will take Rioli in this game. Now, Port Adelaide have struggled at times to find goals through their small forwards. I think Cunningham takes the most dangerous here, has to take Rioli out of this game somehow. And I think that he did really well last week, Rioli, against Hawthorn. He had Blake Hardwick, who's another really good small defender, and he did really well. He had 15 touches, about 8 score involvements, kicked 2 goals, Rioli. He was brilliant. One of the big reasons why Port Adelaide won that game, and it was really good with his pressure. So that's where I'm kind of thinking with Cunningham going to him. But let's get to the tips. My brother, he has gone Sydney. I have gone Sydney as well. Now, he's gone by 27 points for the Swans. I think this is going to be a very close game. I'm not tipping him that high. I think Port Adelaide will play really well here. I think this is going to be a great game. I don't see this being a walkover for Sydney. I don't even think it's going to be a walkover for Port Adelaide, even though they've had a very good record over the Swans. The reason why I think Sydney are going to win this game is because I think with the week off, they had a really good rest after that Giants game. I think Port Adelaide had a tough game against Hawthorn last week. I think that's why they were so good to come off that game against Geelong, because they did not perform well against Geelong. It was basically a training drill for the Geelong in that second half. So I think Port Adelaide, it was a lot easier for them to respond, because similar to looking at it like the Giants and how they responded against Brisbane, they were there for 3 quarters, but because they put so much effort into that qualifying final, they tired in that last quarter, and it was that gave the Lions the license to then get back into the game. Port Adelaide, I think, had a lot more energy in them for that Hawthorn game. It was a tough game against Hawthorn, though. Can they back it up? I think players like McInerney for the Swans had a really poor qualifying final. He is so important to Sydney. If you guys don't remember at the start of the year, he was amazing for the Swans as that wingman, half forward. So he brings that lot of pressure. He's a real barometer for the Swans. He was the one who was subbed out. So he may actually start as the sub this week. I don't know if he will, but McInerney, I think, is a real big... I think that's a real good thing that he got another rest. Braden Campbell as well, obviously of the injury. I think Sydney definitely will be okay with the week off. And The one thing, like I said, is can the Power back this up 2 weeks in a row, having a tough game? They're going to have a tough game against Sydney. Sydney, that was a real... Look, I don't want to say it was a real mulligan, that game against the Power earlier in the year, a couple of months ago. But I can't see Sydney coming out and playing that poorly again. The one thing me and my brother have said, obviously he's a Port fan, I'm Sydney. At the very least, one of us will be in the grand final. That's a good sign. I don't know how we would react if we were both in it. But anyway, let's move on. Talk about Geelong versus Brisbane. Massive game between these two sides. Interestingly enough, Geelong went in as heavy underdogs against the Power. They're in the prelim. Brisbane Lions went in as heavy underdogs against the Giants. They're into the prelim. So both of these teams probably weren't expected to be at this point, probably playing against each other. I don't think many people would have seen this coming. But questions talking about this game. First of all, do the Cats recall Guthrie and Hawkins? It doesn't look like they will. So it looks like they're going to go with a lot more of a younger lineup. The Cats' ruck call is a very interesting one. Who do they pick out of Stanley or De Koning? Now, De Koning was an emergency against Port Adelaide, while Stanley played in that game and played pretty well. But again, it was against Port, very poor game. I would honestly go with De Koning. I think he's a lot more versatile. But Stanley, they may go with a little bit of experience. On the Lions side, do the Lions have an answer for Tom Stewart? I think that's a very interesting one. I think maybe a Kai Lohman goes and plays on him as that sort of sign. I think that may be the option. The Lions, they need to find another avenue to goal, because I feel like the main reason why they got into that game against the Giants wasn't really a lot of structure and a lot of skill. It was the fact that they put this game into chaos. And that may be a way they can beat Geelong, because they put this game into chaos. They got the ball moving. The one problem the Lions were having as well was the fact that they continued to bomb long. They can't do that against the Cats, because if they bomb long against the Cats, they are going to be losing this by 40, 50 points. They need to find short little lead-ups, one-on-ones. That's the way they're going to beat the Cats. That's a big talking point on this game for the Lions. And looking at the matchups in this game, Harris Andrews, I think he has to go to Jeremy Cameron. They were very lucky last week that Jackson Payne didn't cost them this one against Jesse Hogan, because Hogan was massive and almost took this game away from the Lions. I think they have to go with Harris Andrews on him and just hope for the best. At this point, maybe bring in another taller defender, whether that is Dara Joyce, and then play Jackson Payne as well. They have to shut down Jeremy Cameron here. If he kicks 4 or 5+ goals, they won't get away with it, because the Giants let them off the hook. They won't get that lucky 2 weeks in a row. I think this is a massive matchup. Probably the most important one is Starskovic up against Stengel. I think that Stengel is probably the most traditional small forward. I don't think he won't like playing against Brian Myers or Brad Close, Starskovic. I think Stengel plays closest to goal, so I think Starskovic takes that role. He was brilliant against Toby Green last week, so I think he takes that role as well. I think this is a very interesting one, because obviously small forwards are very prominent to kicking goals in finals, a lot more than taller forwards. So I think this is probably the most important matchup of this game. If Starskovic can keep Stengel quiet, I think it will go a long way to the Lions potentially causing an upset. If Stengel gets off the hook, kicks 3 or 4 goals, Geelong will be in the granny. Another one as well, this one in the midfield, Dunkley up against Dangerfield at stoppage. I think that's pretty fair enough. Both of them will run off it. I think it's a very interesting game for Dunkley, though. I think you might have to be a pretty close checker on Dangerfield, because if Dangerfield plays well here, I think the Cats pretty much on to the grand final. I think the main way to beat the Cats is to stop Dangerfield in big finals. So we'll see how that goes. Do the Cats have to find an answer for Zorko? Because last week against the Giants, they had James Peatling. Peatling did a really good job on Zorko in the first half. But then Zorko started to get into the game, and when he did, the Lions got right back into it. So I think the Cats' best way to stop Dane Zorko is to chuck a dangerous small forward on him. My best option here is Brad Close. I think that's the best way to stop it. Or maybe chuck Ollie Dempsey onto him. You either give him Ollie Dempsey and you give him a fast runner, and because Zorko won't keep up with the pace, or you give him Brad Close, because Brad Close is easier to kick goals. But I don't know if that will be the option, though, because I feel like a Ryan Lester will go to him. So maybe a Brian Myers as well. I feel like that's your option there for Geelong. And on the other side, how do the Lions have to stop Max Holmes? Because he was brilliant against Port Adelaide. They chucked him through the guts. They didn't really keep him on that wing. He played brilliantly. He brought that extra vein of pace that the Cats have desperately needed for a long time. So Max Holmes is also hungry. He missed out on the grand final in 2022, so he'll be hungry to get back onto that grand final stage and hopefully doesn't pull a hamstring again. I'm really unsure as the Lions have a matchup for him here, because if you look at their midfield, the only one I can think of is Will Ashcroft, and obviously Will Ashcroft won't tag you, I'm not saying that, but have him as like a play at stoppage and then run off him, because Ashcroft is the one change of pace in that midfield core. You think of McCluggage, he's probably that faster one, but I still think he's a lot more in the guts, maybe more wing, but that. Dunkley obviously in the guts, Neal's in the guts. He's not going to defend. So I think, and I'm not saying Will Ashcroft has to defend here, but we saw how good he was against the Giants. He changed the game. So if he plays on Max Holmes, keeps him accountable at times, Will Ashcroft, I think that's the only matchup at stoppage that could get the Cats thinking twice about it, because he had free reign against the power, Max Holmes. So that's the only other matchup I think is going to be looked at. But I think this is the game that could be a bit of a blowout. This is unfortunate. I'm sorry to the Lions fans. I'm picking the Cats. I think they're going to win this one pretty comfortably. I can't see a world where they have any sort of chance here, the Lions. My brother's actually said the Cats could win this by will only win this one by 16 points. So he's thinking this one's going to be closer than the other game. I think the Cats are going to win this one pretty comfortably. Now, I think the best way to beat the Cats is through chaos and speed. And I just don't think the Lions are known for that. They're a lot more for their methodical football, short kicking, getting it up the field, and then poking through and then bombing long and then hoping for the best. The Lions, just the last couple of weeks, they had a really easy game against Carlton, obviously, and they looked brilliant. But I don't see a world where the Cats, they are one of the best structured teams in the comp, one of the best coach teams in the comp. I can't see a world where the Lions can pick through them the way they did against the Giants in that second half. So that's where I'm kind of looking at it as well. The only way I can see the Lions winning this one as well is keeping the Cats small forwards under wraps. I can't see a world where that happens. I think I feel like they have Ryan Lester and Starskovic, but the Cats have 3 or even 4 smaller forwards that can get off the chain here. That's where I'm kind of looking at that. If they can shut down Stengel, they can shut down maybe one more like a Brad Close. Then they've got Myers, they've got Ollie Dempsey. I just think the Cats have too many avenues to goal here. But looking at it, that's where I'm seeing it. Both me and my brother are picking Sydney Geelong Grand Final for 2024. That's our tips for this one. Make sure to let us know down below who you think is going to be making the Grand Final this year, guys.